Listen and lean in closer. There is a hush that exists in certain spaces, in empty cathedrals just before dawn, in forgotten libraries long after closing. It is a silence that feels less like absence and more like a hell breath, a waiting. Tonight, we step into that waiting silence, not to break it, but to listen to what it has preserved. For within the most guarded walls on earth, within the Vatican's secret archives, a parallel history of heaven has been quietly written. A history of beings of light and sound, of messengers and watchers, of wings that cast shadows older than nations. We are told stories of angels. We see them in art, hear them in hymns. But what if the stories we know are merely the surface of a much deeper, much stranger well? What if the full truth about angels, their origins, their nature, their purpose, has been carefully, deliberately kept from public view? This is not a journey of faith against science. It is a journey into memory, into the silent stone corridors where the Church keeps its most delicate secrets. The question is not whether angels are real. The question is what the Vatican knows about them, that it has never dared to say aloud. The mystery begins. Consider, for a moment, the universality of the angel across continents, across millennia. In cultures that never touched humanity has described them. They appear in the desert visions of prophets, in the epics of Mesopotamia, in the tomb paintings of pharaohs, in the folklore of islands at the edge of the world. They are called by different names: Malik, Angelos, Deva, Messenger. But the core image persists, a being not of this earth, an intermediary between the human and the divine. This consistency is haunting. It suggests something far more profound than mere cultural borrowing. It hints at a shared human experience, or perhaps a shared human memory. Yet, for all their prevalence, their origins remain curiously opaque, their true nature shrouded in doctrinal mystery. Why does every major belief system describe them? And why do the descriptions at their deepest roots share such startling similarities? The answers, it seems, are not found in the open light of Sunday sermons, but in the restricted shadow of archival vaults. The Vatican archives stand as the definitive repository of this hidden narrative. For centuries it has served not merely as a library, but as a filter. It decides which angelic stories are sanctified and which are sealed away. It holds the original testimonies, the unedited visions, the raw accounts of encounters that were too strange, too specific, too unsettling for public consumption. The global fascination with angels, then, is not a simple matter of religious belief. It is an intuitive pull toward a mystery that has been institutionally managed. We sense there is more to the story. The archives confirm that suspicion. They are the locked room at the end of the hall, and within it, the original, unredacted manuscript of heaven's relationship with earth waits, page after page, in perfect, silent preservation. What exactly are the Vatican archives? To understand what is hidden, one must first understand the vault itself. The Vatican Apostolic Archive is not a single room. It is a kingdom of paper and parchment, a subterranean city of history, sprawling beneath the sacred soil. Its corridors stretch for miles, a labyrinthine testament to 2,000 years of uninterrupted record-keeping. It contains over 600 separate archival collections, millions of documents, each a fossilized moment of human struggle, diplomacy, faith, and fear. Its official purpose is administrative, the memory of the papacy and the governance of the Church. But its unofficial purpose is far more intriguing. It is the world's most sophisticated theological containment facility. Think of it as a spiritual quarantine. Ideas, once deemed too potent or too dangerous, are not destroyed. They are neutralized through isolation. They are cataloged, numbered, and placed in climate-controlled stasis, where they can neither infect the faithful nor be lost to time. The archives have evolved through phases of secrecy. For centuries, they were utterly closed, a realm of rumor. Even now, access is a privilege of extreme rarity. granted only to scholars of impeccable credentials whose research proposals undergo intense scrutiny. There are sections within sections, private indices known only to the prefect and his most trusted archivists. These are fondi reservati, the reserve funds. It is here, among letters concerning heresy trials and suppressed mystical movements, that one finds the most sensitive angelological material. Documents are not merely stored, they are contextually buried. A revelatory vision of a seraph might be filed between a mundane property deed and a grocery list for a papal banquet, a tactic of obfuscation as old as librarianship itself. The archive's power lies in this duality. It is both a preserver of truth and a dampener of its echo. It ensures that certain frequencies of the past are never broadcast, only studied in whispers under lamplight by those who know exactly which locked drawer to ask for. The origins of angelic lore. Long before the archangels Gabriel or Michael were named, other civilizations were already speaking with the sky. To find the true genesis of angelic lore, we must travel back to a world where the boundary between the natural and the supernatural was thin as morning mist. In ancient Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, the Apkallu were not gods, but something else. They were 7 sages, beings of immense wisdom, sent by the god Ea to teach humanity the foundations of civilization, law, writing, agriculture. They were often depicted as hybrid creatures, part man, part fish, emerging from the watery abyss. They were intermediaries. In Egypt, the concept took a different luminous form. The Ba was a part of the soul depicted as a human-headed bird, able to travel between the world of the living and the realm of the gods. Wall paintings show these spirit beings hovering near the deceased not as judges, but as guides. In Zoroastrian Persia, the framework became more structured. The Aimshah Spenas were holy immortals, radiant beings of truth, order, and beneficence who served Ahura Mazda, the wise lord. They were personifications of divine virtues, each with a specific domain over the natural and moral world. What connects these ancient visions? A consistent thread. These beings are not the ultimate source of power. They are emissaries. They are functionaries of a higher, often distant authority. They possess knowledge beyond humanity's grasp, and they occasionally cross the threshold to deliver it. They are defined by their role as messengers and mediators. This is the primordial clay for which the angel is formed. It was not a sudden invention of Judaism or Christianity, but an ancient cross-cultural archetype that these later faiths inherited, refined, and codified. The Vatican archives hold the evidence of this inheritance, not in a single damning scroll, but in the comparative notes of medieval and Renaissance scholars who, studying newly rediscovered pagan texts, were startled to find their own angels staring back at them from much older tablets. The Lord did not begin in Jerusalem or Rome. It began in the dawn time of human wonder, when people first looked up and sensed they were not alone and that the emptiness above was, in fact, densely populated. Angels before Christianity. The biblical angels we recognize, the ones who announce births and wage wars in heaven, are latecomers to a party that had already been raging for millennia. To comprehend what the early church was working with, we must survey the rich and strange tapestry of celestial beings that already fill the ancient imagination. The Greeks had their daimons, spirit beings that could be benevolent or malevolent, intermediaries between gods and men. Plato spoke of them as divine messengers. The Romans had their genii, personal guardian spirits. But it is in the broader Near Eastern world that the parallels become uncanny. Hittite reliefs show winged solar discs from which often emanate stylized figures. Assyrian carvings portray colossal winged guardians with the bodies of bulls or lions and the heads of kings, the Lamassu and Shidu, whose role was to protect palaces and temples from unseen evil. These were not gods to be worshipped, but powerful spiritual custodians. Even in the Hebrew tradition, that Christianity directly sprang from, The picture was complex. The Hebrew Bible mentions the B'nai Elohim, the sons of God, the cherubim who are not baby-faced toddlers but mighty hybrid throne guardians, and the mysterious seraphim, the burning ones. These beings are often terrifying. When they appear, the first words they must speak are, "Fear not," because the natural human reaction is sheer, paralyzing terror. This pre-Christian angel is a being of overwhelming otherness. Its form is unstable, often a convergence of animal and human features. Its presence alters the environment. It brings fire, earthquake, a deafening sound like many waters. The early church fathers, building their theology, were faced with this existing pantheon of spiritual entities. They had a decision to make: how to baptize this inheritance, how to fit these powerful, sometimes frightening figures into a new monotheistic system where only one God could be worshipped. The solution was hierarchy, demotion, and careful reinterpretation. The old protective spirits became guardian angels. The terrifying throne guardians became symbols of God's majesty. The potentially rebellious sons of God were pushed to the theological margins. The archives contain the working papers of this great project of spiritual reorganization. The debates, the doubts, the letters arguing over which ancient stories could be safely adopted and which must be permanently silenced. The Vatican's earliest angel manuscripts. Within the archive's oldest sections, among codices written on vellum, so thin it seems like ghost skin, we find the first Christian attempts to make sense of the angelic phenomenon. These are not yet the polished doctrines of the later church councils. These are raw, experimental, and often deeply personal. They are the writings of early theologians like Tertullian and Origen, grappling with questions that still feel urgent. Are angels corporeal? Do they have free will? How do they move? Origen, in particular, speculated on a grand cosmic drama where souls could rise to become angels or fall into human form, a fluid, almost evolutionary spirituality that would later be condemned. Then there are the private diaries of desert monks, the anchorites who sought God in the Egyptian wilderness. Their parchments, stained with sand and candle wax, describe encounters that are less about glorious proclamation and more about subtle, persistent presence. They speak of a comforting light that appeared during moments of despair, a voice that recited scripture when their own memory failed, a feeling of being guarded during sleep. These are the accounts that form the basis of the concept of the personal guardian angel, a doctrine that grew not from top-down decree, but from the bottom-up accumulation of thousands of such intimate, undocumented experiences. The archives also hold the earliest liturgies and prayers dedicated to angels, formulas for invocation and protection that border on the mystical. Some manuscripts show careful editing. Phrases crossed out, whole paragraphs omitted by a later hand. You can trace the development of an official line. The wild, experiential faith of the first believers is gradually being tidied up, systematized, made safe for institutional consumption. The angels themselves undergo a transformation in these texts. They become more formal, their functions more specialized. The chaotic spiritual democracy of the early church slowly solidifies into a celestial bureaucracy with ranks, orders, and clearly delineated chains of command. These early manuscripts are the birth cry of Christian angelology, a record community trying to translate awe into understanding, and in the process, deciding what parts of that awe were simply too potent to be left uncontrolled. Lost texts removed from the canon. The Bible on your shelf is a curated collection, a consensus achieved after centuries of fierce debate. But for every book that made it into the canon, several others were set aside, debated, and ultimately rejected. These are the apocryphal texts, the hidden writings, and within their pages, the angels behave very differently. Take the Ascension of Isaiah, a text beloved in early Christian circles. In it, the prophet Isaiah is taken on a guided tour of the seven heavens. What he sees is a staggering hierarchy of angels, each level more magnificent and terrifying than the last, culminating in a vision of the pre-incarnate Christ worshipped by seraphim. The description is technical, almost cartographic. It provides a map of the cosmos that is far more detailed and structured than anything in the canonical New Testament. Then there are infancy gospels, like the Protevangelium of James, which fill in the silent years of Jesus' childhood. Here, angels are constant companions, not distant heralds. They play with the child Jesus, protect him from harm, and perform small domestic miracles. This portrayal is deeply humanizing, suggesting a familiarity between the divine and the human that the later church would find theologically problematic. Other texts, like the Apocalypse of Peter, offer graphic, terrifying visions of angels as agents of wrath and judgment in the afterlife. Descriptions so vivid they verge on the grotesque. Why were these texts excluded? The reasons are a mix of theology, politics, and narrative control. Some were deemed to contain dubious doctrines. Others presented a cosmology that was too complex or too specific, threatening to create a gnosis or secret knowledge for an elite. Many simply told stories that were too intimate, too strange, or too wildly imaginative for the emerging Orthodox framework, which sought to centralize revelation in the person of Christ and the authority of the apostolic line. By removing these texts, the church wasn't just hiding stories, it was standardizing the angelic experience. It was declaring that angels would act in certain ways, appear in certain contexts, and convey certain messages. Any account that fell outside those parameters was labeled apocryphal of doubtful origin and filed away in the archives, where they remain as ghost limbs of the Christian tradition, whispering of a heaven that was once much more crowded, much more mysterious, and much closer to home. The Book of Enoch and its angelic secrets. Of all the suppressed texts, one stands as a colossal, shadowy monument. The Book of Enoch. It is the great what if of biblical literature. Quoted in the New Testament epistle of Jude, revered by the early church fathers, it was nonetheless excluded from the official canon and faded from Western memory for over 1,000 years until copies were rediscovered in the 18th century. Its contents are nothing short of explosive. Enoch tells a story of angels who are not merely obedient messengers, but explorers, rebels, and corruptors. It introduces the Watchers, 200 angels who, led by figures named Simjaza and Azazel, look upon the daughters of men, find them beautiful, and decide to descend to Mount Hermon, take human wives, and teach humanity forbidden arts. This is a foundational myth of the fallen angel. From these unions come the Nephilim, the giant heroes of old. The knowledge the Watchers impart is a double-edged sword. They teach metallurgy, cosmetics, astronomy, and sorcery, advancing civilization while simultaneously seeding its corruption. The text reads like ancient science fiction, a tale of advanced beings intervening in human evolution with catastrophic, hybrid results. God's response is a great flood, not just to cleanse human wickedness, but to wipe out the genetic legacy of this illicit union. The archangels Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael are then dispatched to bind the rebel Watchers and cast them into a dark pit until a final judgment. The Vatican's relationship with Enoch is profoundly conflicted. While the Church never accepted it as scripture, it never fully abandoned it either. For centuries, the only complete versions known to exist were in Gwizi, the liturgical language of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which did include it in its canon. The Vatican archives, however, contain fragments, quotations, and extensive commentaries by medieval scholars who were clearly fascinated and troubled by it. The book provides a narrative that explains the origin of evil in a way the canonical Genesis does not. It offers a cosmic backstory for the sons of God in Genesis 6. Its presence in the archives is a silent admission. Here is a story too powerful to destroy, too dangerous to promulgate, and too insightful to completely ignore. It sits in the shadows to complete alternate angelic history, challenging the simpler, safer story taught from the pulpits. The Watchers, Angels who walk the earth, the watchers of the Enochian tradition, are a category unto themselves. They are not the fallen angels of later Christian tradition, who rebel out of pride before the creation of man. These angels fall because of humanity. Their sin is one of fascination, desire, and ultimately violation of a cosmic boundary. They are teachers, but their teaching is transgressive. Azazel, a chief among them, is said to have taught men to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates, the art of war. He taught women the art of deception through bracelets, ornaments, and cosmetics. Other watchers instructed in herbology, astrology, and the reading of signs. This narrative is profoundly ambivalent. It presents civilization's advancements not as a divine gift, but as a leaked, illicit technology from a higher realm. It suggests that our knowledge, our culture, even our wars have a non-human origin. This is why the Watchers are so controversial. They blur the line between divine revelation and forbidden interference. They make angels directly responsible for the ambiguities of human progress. The Church's dilemma was clear: accept this narrative, and you introduce a problematic source for human evil and knowledge. Reject it entirely, and you lose a compelling explanation for the strange, hybrid tales in other ancient cultures, and for the pervasive human sense of having been visited in the deep past. The archives hold manuscripts that show theologians wrestling with this very problem. Some attempted to allegorize the Watchers, turning them into symbols of human sin. Others tried to neatly separate them from the good angels of the official tradition. But the sheer persistence of Watcher-like figures in global myth, from Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods, to the Apkallu sages of Mesopotamia, suggests the story touched a deep archetypal nerve. The Vatican, by keeping Enoch and related texts in a state of restricted access, effectively placed a quarantine on this idea. The Watchers were not declared untrue. They were declared too potent, too complex for general consumption. They represent the angelic narrative at its most intimate and most dangerous. Angels who walked among us, who shared our lives, our beds, and our fate, and in doing so, changed the course of history in ways that heaven itself had to violently correct. Encounters the Church could not explain. Beyond the ancient texts lie the records of lived experience. Scattered throughout the archival registers, often filed under miracula or visions, are thousands of first-hand accounts of angelic encounters from the Middle Ages to the early modern period. These are not the stylized visions of saints, but the confused, urgent testimonies of ordinary people, peasants, monks, soldiers, and nobles. A shepherd boy in 12th century France reports being led out of a blizzard by a tall figure whose feet did not touch the snow, who spoke a single reassuring sentence in his own dialect, then vanished as the storm cleared. The local bishop's investigation notes describe the boy as simple but truthful, and the event is marked inexplicabilis, unexplainable. A nun in a 15th century Italian convent writes a terrified letter to her confessor about it being a painful light that appeared in her cell night after night, not speaking, only watching. The letter is annotated by a theologian who speculates it could be a trial of faith, or perhaps something else. There are reports from sailors during the age of exploration who swore that during terrible storms, luminous forms were seen clinging to masts or hovering above the waves, and that their ships were guided to safety. These accounts were collected by priests, investigated by diocesan authorities, and often sent to Rome for review. The Church's response was typically cautious. If the encounter produced orthodox piety, it might be cautiously accepted as a private grace. If it was bizarre, frightening, or produced unconventional claims, it was filed away with a note to discourage discussion. The cumulative effect of reading these dusty folios is profound. You begin to see a pattern emerge. The angelic phenomenon, as experienced by people across centuries, is not monolithic. It is inconsistent. The beings described vary in appearance, demeanor, and purpose. Some are comforting. Others are austere. Some communicate clearly. others only in symbols or overwhelming emotion. The Church, in its role as a guardian of doctrine, faced a relentless tide of unstandardized mystical experience. Its strategy was not to deny all of it, but to sanitize the stream to promote a handful of approved archetypal encounters, like Joan of Arc's voices, while quietly archiving the rest. This vast collection of unexplained encounters forms a hidden counter-history of Christianity, a history written not in theology, but in the frightened, awestruck words of those who believed they had touched the hem of another world and who left their testimony in the one place that would both preserve and conceal forever the angelic hierarchies that were never taught publicly. Most who know a little of angelology have heard of the 9 choirs: seraphim, cherubim, thrones, dominions, virtues, powers, principalities, archangels, angels. This schema, popularized by Pseudo-Dionysius in the 5th century, is the public face of celestial order. But the archives reveal that this was only one proposed map of heaven, and by no means the most elaborate. Other manuscripts, often labeled speculativo or theologica dubia, outline hierarchies with 12, even 15 distinct orders. Some introduce chilling categories absent from the standard list. They're the ophonym, the wheels within wheels from Ezekiel's vision, described not as beings but as conscious, living vehicles of divine mobility covered in eyes. There are the Hashem, the souls of fire, angelic beings so close to human virtue, they are almost indistinguishable from the righteous dead. Then there are the more troubling classifications. Some texts speak of the Tarshishim, angels associated with the element water and the depths of the subconscious, who govern dreams and hidden memories. Others describe the Malachim Jebarim, the angels of severity, whose sole purpose is to enact divine justice in its most terrifying, implacable form, beings not of mercy but of perfect, terrifying law. The most secretive writings hint at a realm beyond even these hierarchies, the Angelus Incogniti, the unknown angels, beings whose function and nature are completely opaque to human understanding, who may not even be aware of our existence, operating on principles of reality we cannot fathom. Why were these more complex systems not taught? The reason is pastoral simplicity and control. A 9-tier hierarchy is complex enough to inspire awe, but orderly enough to reinforce the idea of a structured, rational universe under God's command. Introducing a host of obscure, powerful, or amoral-seeming angelic classes could lead to confusion, superstitious worship of specific angels, or a sense that the cosmos was governed by capricious and alien forces. The Church chose a tidy celestial bureaucracy for public consumption. The Messier, more mysterious and more daunting cartographies of heaven, were deemed for experts only theologians who could handle the ambiguity without their faith being shaken. They were locked away, not because they were false, but because they revealed a heaven far more vast, strange, and potentially unsettling than the one presented in catechism class. Forbidden angel depictions in Vatican art. The public art of the Vatican, the frescoes of Raphael, the sculptures of Bernini, shows angels as idealized beings of beauty and grace. They are the muscular youths of Michelangelo, the delicate children of Baroque putty. But in the locked portfolios of the Vatican Library's graphic collection, a different iconography survives. Here are sketches, studies, and completed works that were never meant for public chapels. Some show angels with multiple sets of wings that are not feathery, but appear metallic, articulated like insect carapaces. Others depict their faces not as human, but as geometric patterns of light, or as assemblages of symbolic eyes and wheels, directly inspired by the more terrifying biblical visions. There is a series of ink washes from the late Renaissance, attributed to an unknown monk, showing angels not as helpers, but as auditors. They stand over sleeping figures, scanning them with beams of light that seem to extract strands of memory or intention, recording them in luminous books. The feeling is not one of comfort, but a profound, impersonal scrutiny. Even more striking are the depictions of angels in moments of sorrow or conflict. A small, painted panel from the 14th century shows an angel weeping tears of fire as it looks down upon a battlefield. Another, a charcoal drawing, captures two angels in a silent, fierce struggle, their forms blurred with motion, a representation of some unseen celestial conflict. These forbidden images serve a vital, unspoken purpose. They document the parts of the angelic experience that dogma could not comfortably contain: the alien nature, the emotional complexity, the potential for inner conflict, the role as cosmic observers rather than just comforting friends. The artists who created these works were often mystics themselves, trying to render visions that troubled them. The Church, as patron and censor, allowed the creation of these works, perhaps as a form of controlled exploration, but then ensured they remain within the palace walls. To display them would be to admit that the angelic reality might include terror, ambiguity, and a majesty so fierce it bordered on the monstrous. The archives thus hold a secret art history, a gallery of the divine that was considered too true, and therefore too dangerous for the eyes of the faithful. Fallen angels and the cosmic rebellion. The concept of fallen angels is central to Christian cosmology, but the official story is remarkably sparse. A prideful rebellion led by Lucifer, a war in heaven a fall. The details are left to imagination and poetry, like Milton's Paradise Lost. The archival documents, however, show that within the Church's own intellectual chambers, the story was debated, expanded, and worried over for centuries. Sealed theological treatises explore questions the Catechism avoids. What was the precise nature of the angelic sin? Was it truly pride? Or was it something else: the desire for creative autonomy, a rejection of the plan for humanity, a form of spiritual envy? Some manuscripts explore the possibility of multiple falls at different times for different reasons. Others delve into the fate of the fallen. Are they merely imprisoned? Do they retain their former powers? One persistent, troubling theory found in marginal notes and private letters is the idea that the fallen angels did not simply become devils in a hell of flames, but were exiled into the fabric of the material universe itself. They became the hidden laws of decay, the principles of entropy, the shadows in nature, the source of chaos and suffering within creation. This is a far more profound and metaphysically disturbing notion than a simple underworld prison. It suggests the enemy is not out there, but woven into the very nature of a fallen world. The archives also contain references to a more obscure, related tradition: the belief that not all angels who disagree were cast out, that some took a neutral stance, or were given a period of penance, or were assigned a distant, lonely post in the cosmos. These ideas were never developed into doctrine because they introduce a troubling moral ambiguity into the celestial realm. They suggested that the lines between loyalty and rebellion might not be as stark as preached, that there might be angels in a state of suspension of exile or of mournful duty. The Church's official, simplified story of the fall served a clear purpose. It established a clear dichotomy of good and evil, obedience and rebellion. The richer, messier, more speculative versions preserved in the archives reveal a theological deep struggle to reconcile the idea of perfect, created beings with the possibility of catastrophic failure, a struggle whose unresolved questions linger in the silent annotations of 1,000 restricted pages. Angelic technology or divine power. How do angels do what they do? How do they move instantly, communicate telepathically, manifest light, or interact with the physical world? The public answer is simple: divine miracle. It is magic by another name. But within the archived research of certain Jesuit scientists and natural philosophers from the 16th to 18th centuries, a different language occasionally emerges. These men, trained in the emerging disciplines of physics, optics, and astronomy, try to apply a nascent scientific logic to angelic phenomena. Their private notes, often written in code or obscure Latin phrases, speculate on angels manipulating ether or quintessence, the hypothesized fifth element of the cosmos. They discuss angelic movement not as teleportation, but as an ability to navigate higher spatial dimensions imperceptible to us. They analyze reports of angelic voices, wondering if they are a form of direct impression upon the auditory cortex, bypassing the ear. One remarkable document from the 17th century, attributed to a Jesuit connected to the Vatican Observatory, is titled Tractatus de Motu Angelorum, Treatise on the Motion of Angels. It is less a theological work and more a work of speculative physics. It uses geometric diagrams and references to Galileo's laws of motion to hypothesize how a non-corporeal intelligence might interact with matter. The author is careful to always subordinate his speculations to God's omnipotence, but the intellectual endeavor is clear. He is trying to find mechanics for the miraculous. This technological interpretation was, of course, never sanctioned. It risked reducing angels to natural, if advanced, phenomena, stripping them of their transcendent mystery. It also risked a dangerous comparison. If angels use advanced natural principles, could other intelligent beings do the same? The line between angel and extraterrestrial, a line that did not conceptually exist at the time, could become perilously thin. These documents represent a road not taken. They show a moment where the Church's intellectual vanguard almost attempted to build a bridge between faith and the new science through angelology, but the bridge was deemed too risky. The notes were shelved, the theories remained private speculations. The angels would remain firmly in the realm of the supernatural, their workings a mystery to be revered, not a puzzle to be solved by natural philosophy. Why the Vatican fears misinterpretation. The Church's secrecy is not born from a mere desire to hoard knowledge. It is rooted in a deep historical, and some would say traumatized, fear of misinterpretation. The archives themselves are a monument to this fear. For 2 millennia, the Church has watched as its teachings have been twisted, fragmented, and weaponized. Heresies have split nations, mystical movements have led to chaos, and literal readings of apocalyptic texts have spurred violence. Angels, as potent symbols of divine power and communication, are particularly vulnerable to misinterpretation. What if people began to worship specific angels, creating a new polytheism? What if tales of the Watchers were used to justify occult practices or claims of alien ancestry? What if visions of stern, judging angels were used to fuel fanatical movements of puritanical violence? The Church sees itself as the steward of a living, delicate truth. Its role is to present that truth in a way that saves, uplifts, and unifies. The raw materials in the archives are the unrefined or powerful, impure, and potentially toxic if handled without the proper theological safeguards. A document describing an angel of terrifying appearance might inspire holy fear in a mature mystic, but could cause psychotic breaks or superstitious terror in a vulnerable believer. A text detailing complex angelic hierarchies might satisfy a scholar's curiosity, but could lead a layperson into esoteric pride or spiritual confusion. The Vatican's policy of restriction is, from its perspective, an act of spiritual protectionism and narrative control. It is the application of a priesthood of the intellect, where dangerous knowledge is filtered through a trained, ordained class who can interpret it within the safe confines of tradition and doctrine. To release everything would be in their view, to abandon their flock in a wilderness of conflicting, terrifying, and easily misconstrued spiritual data. The archives hide the truth not to deceive the world, but to protect the world from a truth it may not be spiritually equipped to handle. It is a paternalistic secrecy, born from a conviction that humanity, in its frailty, needs a managed revelation. Theories linking angels to non-human beings. Locked within the 20th century sections of the archives, among the papers of modernist theologians and documents from the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, a new kind of speculation appears, one forced upon the Church by the changing worldview of the modern era. With the advent of aviation, rocketry, and the UFO phenomenon, the ancient question, were angels, encountered a new scientific fictional rival. Who are the extraterrestrials? The archives contain internal memoranda, discussion summaries, and private letters that show church officials and their scientific advisors grappling with this convergence. Could some angelic encounters of the past be explained by a natural, albeit advanced, non-human intelligence? Could the concept of spiritual beings created by God be reconciled with the possibility of physical beings evolved on other worlds? The documents reveal a careful, cautious engagement. One prevailing internal theory, never publicly stated, suggests a taxonomy. Angelic beings are pure spiritual intelligences created directly by God. Extraterrestrials would be corporeal, biological beings, part of God's physical creation. They are distinct categories. However, another, more speculative strand of thought ponders if the line might be blurrier. If such advanced beings existed, might they, to a pre-technological humanity, appear as angels? Might they, even in God's providence, have served an angelic function at certain points in history? This is a breathtakingly modern, almost science-fictional idea lurking in the margins of Vatican correspondence. The overarching tone, however, is one of extreme caution. To publicly entertain such links would be to open a theological and pastoral minefield. It could demystify the sacred, reduce angels to spacemen, or conversely, sacralize UFOs in a dangerous way. The Church's response has been a studied silence on the connection and a reinforcement of the traditional spiritual definition of angels. The archive theories remain just that, theoretical exercises confined to rarefied air of elite seminars. They represent the Church's intellectual attempt to keep pace with a shifting cosmos, while its public face holds firmly to the ancient, mystical definitions that have sustained faith for centuries. The truth, as hinted in these papers, may be that the categories of angel and non-human intelligence are not mutually exclusive in the mind of God, but for the sake of doctrinal clarity and spiritual peace, that as a synthesis the Vatican is not yet ready and may never be ready to proclaim. The hidden angel prophecies. Prophecy in the Judeo-Christian tradition is typically seen as a direct communication from God through a human prophet, but a subset of archived texts often grouped under the title Angelica Vaticinia. Angelic prophecies suggest a different mode, prophecy delivered by angels concerning future angelic activity. These are not prophecies of worldly events, but prophecies of heavenly intervention. They describe cycles or visitations, where angelic presence on earth becomes more pronounced, often preceding or accompanying great human crises. One manuscript, copied in the 10th century but claiming much older origins, speaks of a time of the unveiling, when the veil between the choir and the clay will grow thin, and angels will be perceived not just by mystics, but by many in ways that will cause both great awe and great confusion. Another from the Renaissance cryptically describes future events where angels will intervene not as warriors, but as stabilizers, holding the fabric of reality together during periods of extreme spiritual or even metaphysical turbulence. The most chilling are the so-called judgment precursor prophecies. These do not describe the final judgment itself, but a period just prior, marked by intense global angelic activity. Angels will be seen gathering, observing, and separating the strands of light and shadow in the human world, a process invisible to most but perceptible to those with eyes of the Spirit. The Church has never endorsed these prophecies. They are too specific, too prone to fueling millenarian panic, and too focused on the angels themselves rather than on Christ. They are kept, like all potentially volatile material, under lock and key. Their existence, however, implies a belief within certain mystical traditions that the angels are not static background figures in the drama of salvation, but active participants whose own operations have a timeline, a strategy, and a climax that is yet to come. To release these prophecies would be to give a script to the end times, a script the Church believes is God's alone to write and reveal in its own time and way. Modern angel encounters investigated by the Church. The assumption that angelic encounters are a relic of the pre-scientific past is quietly contradicted by a small, discreet office within the Vatican's bureaucracy. While there is no public department of angelic affairs, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, and to a lesser extent the Pontifical Council for Culture, maintain channels for reviewing modern, credible accounts of unexplained phenomena with spiritual characteristics. These are not the dramatic, weeping statues or solar miracles of popular Marian apparitions. These are private, often haunting, reports that surface through confessors, spiritual directors, and sometimes through diplomatic channels. A respected neurologist in the 1970s, a non-practicing Catholic, submits a detailed report through his local bishop during a near-death experience on the operating table. He encountered a presence of overwhelming intelligence and compassion that identified itself with a name he later found corresponds to an obscure archangel from early Syrian Christian texts. The Vatican's response was to interview him extensively, have him undergo psychological evaluation, and file the report under Phenomena Unclassified. A group of astronauts in a confidential debriefing after a joint mission in the 1990s reported a shared, fleeting visual phenomenon outside the spacecraft, a configuration of light that moved with purpose and intelligence. While officially attributed to a cosmic ray effect, a memo within the archives notes the description's uncanny resemblance to certain medieval mystic accounts of the Ophanim. The Church's modern investigations are characterized by extreme skepticism first, followed by meticulous, silent cataloging. The goal is not to prove angels exist. That is an article of faith. The goal is to monitor whether the phenomenology of angelic encounters is changing in the modern age, and to assess if any patterns emerge that have theological significance. These modern dossiers are the living extension of the medieval Miracula files. They prove that the Church believed the phenomenon is ongoing. The encounters are still happening. The witnesses are now doctors, pilots, and scientists. And the Vatican is still listening, recording, and filing the reports away, adding new cryptic pages to the oldest and most secret dossier of all. Why the Vatican does not release everything. We have journeyed to the shadows of the archives, seen the suppressed texts, the forbidden art, the secret prophecies, and the modern case files. The final, pragmatic question remains, why not open the doors? The official public reasons are dignified and logical: preservation of fragile documents, respect for the privacy of individuals mentioned, the need for scholarly order. But the deeper unspoken reasons form the true bedrock of the policy. First, there is the protection of the mystical journey. The Church has long taught that the spiritual path involves a gradual unveiling, a growth in understanding proportionate to one's growth in holiness and wisdom. To dump the entirety of its esoteric knowledge into the public domain would be to short-circuit this process. It would give the intellectual answers without demanding the spiritual transformation that gives those answers their true meaning. It would be like giving a first-year physics student equations for quantum gravity. They might memorize them, but they would not understand them. Second, there is a defense of the central narrative. Christianity's power lies in its focus on the story of Jesus Christ. Angels are supporting characters. To release archives that make them the protagonists of complex, ambiguous, and thrilling cosmic dramas would risk shifting the focus. It could create competing centers of theological interest, leading to fragmentation. Third, and perhaps most critically, is the preservation of God's mystery. The Church believes it is a steward of a revelation, not the possessor of complete knowledge. To claim it had all the answers about angels neatly filed and explained would be a form of idolatry, the idolatry of information. It would replace the living mystery of God with a dead database of facts. By keeping secrets, the Vatican, in a paradoxical way, is protecting the concept of the sacred as something that cannot be fully captured, cataloged, and comprehended. The archives are not a box of answers. They are a testament to unanswered and perhaps unanswerable questions. To release them would not satisfy curiosity. It would only reveal how much deeper the rabbit hole goes, potentially shattering simplistic faith, without offering a stable new ground on which to stand. The silence, therefore, is not just a policy. It is a theological statement. Some truths are not meant to be owned, only reverently approached. What the hidden truth suggests, piecing together the fragments, the Enochian narratives, the mystical hierarchies, the technical speculations, the consistent reports of encounters, a picture emerges that is both grander and more unsettling than the Sunday school version. The hidden truth suggests that angels are not a monolithic chorus singing eternal praise. They are a diverse ecology of non-human intelligence operated within and alongside our reality. Their purposes are manifold: messengers, yes, but also guardians, observers, auditors, engineers of reality, and perhaps even participants in a long-term project of cosmic maintenance and human development. It suggests a universe that is far more integrated, far more intentionally layered than material science alone can describe. The ancient sense of being watched or guided may not be a primitive superstition, but a dim perception of this ongoing interaction. The stories of the Watchers hint that this interaction has not always been benign or sanctioned, that there have been episodes of profound interference and unintended consequence. The technical language used by past scholars suggests that what we call the supernatural may operate on principles that are natural, just exponentially more advanced and interwoven with consciousness itself. This view does not diminish the divine. It expands the canvas of creation. It presents a cosmos teeming with purposeful life at every level, from the biological to the spiritual, all under the sovereignty of a creator whose methods are infinitely more complex and subtle than our theologies have often allowed. The hidden truth, in essence, suggests that we live in a kind of spiritual ecosystem, and angels are most visible to those with eyes to see and powerful fauna. Our planet, our species, may be a site of special interest within this ecosystem, for reasons the archives hint at but never fully disclose. To accept this is to exchange a comfortable static heaven for a dynamic, interactive, and potentially dangerous universe, a universe where the divine is not just in the distant throne, but active in every layer of existence through its myriad agents. The final revelation. And now, we arrive at the end of our exploration, not with shouted discovery, but with a quieter, more resonant understanding. The Vatican archives do not hide the truth about angels to keep us in the dark. They hide it to protect the sanctity of the search, the necessity of the journey. The final revelation is this: the greatest secret is that there is no single final secret. There is only an ever-deepening mystery. The archives are a mirror reflecting our own desire for easy answers, for a complete map of heaven. But the reality they guard is that the map is always being drawn, and we are not just its readers, but its co-authors through our faith, our doubt, and our experience. The angels, in all their forbidden complexity, are a reminder that the universe is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived with. They stand at the threshold, not as gatekeepers hiding a treasure, but as signposts pointing to a horizon we can approach but never finally reach. Their withheld stories teach us that knowledge, without corresponding wisdom and spiritual maturity, is a dangerous gift. So as we step back from the silent corridors and into the noise of our world, we carry not a stolen truth, but a new question. A better question. Not what are they hiding, but what in the light of this eternal mystery should I now become? The archives protect the past, but their greatest secret is an invitation to the future, an invitation to live with courage, humility, and open wonder in a world where the line between the natural and the supernatural, the human and the angelic, is far thinner and far more porous than we were ever told. The truth was never meant to be simply found. It was meant to be lived toward. And in that living, we may find that we have been brushing shoulders with angels all along, in the quiet moments, in the act of kindness, in the flashes of insight, and in the silent, listening spaces of our own hearts. The echo of their wings is not in a locked vault in Rome. It is in the stillness you create when you choose to listen. A quiet breath passes. Silence stretches for a while, and then only the echo remains.